For joining, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our San Mateo County Silicon Valley Convention and Visitors Bureau virtual partner event. I think many of you know me, but in the event that you don't, I'm John Hutar, President and CEO of the Bureau, and our entire Bureau team misses not being able to meet with you face-to-face, and we really look forward to being able to do that with you again soon. Your time is valuable, and we appreciate you taking the time to participate here with us today. A few housekeeping notes. We will record this session and make it available to our partners who are unable to join us. Second, the slides you see here and the recording will be shared tomorrow afternoon along with the link of the recording. And lastly, we ask that you ask your questions via chat. We will do our best to get through them all. And before we go further, it was delightful to see the RSVP list. We have all the continental time zones represented, and we appreciate that. We have a number of clients on the call, several meeting planners, and we appreciate you taking the time to learn about what's happening in our backyard here in San Mateo County, Silicon Valley. I do want to highlight our sales team, Tapo Brown and Carla Nahara, who are here to answer any questions you may have related to the status of what's happening in the county. If you have an RFP, and we would love that opportunity to chat with you about it. The dynamics are changing on a regular basis. Our counties have advanced in a very positive manner, opening up further and further, literally by the week. And we thank you for your business in the past, and we're here for you now, and hope to be engaged with you in the future. So thank you for that. And now we'll get to the matter at hand. Prior to COVID, and we can advance the slide, please, Kristen. Our Bureau would publish our annual city report, which highlighted office building projects and various data points of economic interest for the coming year. A highly sought after document as our partners went into budget mode. With most corporate campuses closed and many development projects on hold, we realized we needed to pivot and deliver some compelling content to help everyone navigate through the COVID era. This idea ultimately culminated in today's topic, Snapshot into the Future, Hotel and Travel Projections 2021 through 2024. We have assembled the A list, I'll say the A++ list of speakers today. Julie Purnell, Managing Director of CBRE Hotels Advisory, Doug Yakel, Public Information Officer at San Francisco International Airport, and Tara Stangel, Head of Lodging Supply at TripActions. Julie, Doug, and Tara, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today, for sharing your vault of information with us, for the rehearsal time, for all the energy that is expended before we do these webinars. So we're deeply indebted, and I know our viewers are really going to enjoy it. So now on to our first presenter. Julie Purnell is the Managing Director of CBRE Hotels Advisory, leads the advisory practice for the West Division, and is based here in San Francisco. Ms. Purnell brings 30 years of hospitality experience from the principal, operator, and franchisor perspective. Throughout her distinguished career in acquisitions and development, Julie has held leadership roles at notable hotel companies, including Kimpton Hotels and Restaurants, Lowe's Hotels, Marriott International, and others. At CBRE, Julie offers a diverse expertise in strategic advisory assignments, including acquisition, disposition, due diligence, market and economic feasibility studies, developer and hotel operator selections, development, real estate conversion and repositioning, operational planning, and TOT forecasting. Clients including hotel owners, developers, public REITs, private equity firms, major hotel companies, municipalities, universities, and public agencies. A noted authority in hotel real estate, Julie is a frequent guest speaker and moderator at industry events, and her insights regarding lodging trends are often sought by the press and real estate industry publications. She's the co-founder of Women in Hospitality Investment Network, which promotes the advancement of women in the transaction side of the lodging industry. And in short order, if you're going to do anything with an hotel investment, you want to talk to Julie and bring her and her team into the picture. Julie, welcome. I know many of our viewers are interested to hear your insights on the future hotel market performance. Let us know when you're ready to advance the slides, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, John. And I really appreciate the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. If you can go ahead and advance the slide. I thought we would start off by providing some perspective as to where the hotel industry is today. We can go to the next slide. And the next slide. Our research division has been collecting hotel industry data for 90 years, and the lowest annual occupancy on record was 44.5% in 1933. Our current US lodging 2020 occupancy forecast is just under 40%, which is less than the historical low point ever recorded and which occurred during the Great Depression. The forecast stems from an avoidance of travel. People aren't traveling due to financial uncertainty, fears related to social distancing, and being susceptible to the virus, and the contraction in the overall economy. Next slide. This slide really demonstrates that avoidance of travel, of air travel. Outside of some recent growth in the summer leisure-related flying travel, we're not seeing much improvement in people getting back on planes to travel for business purposes. And I know Doug will cover this a little bit later. You can go ahead to the next slide. So as states and cities and counties begin to move into the next phase of reopening from sheltering in place, hotels are also reopening. Nationwide, about 5.5% of hotel rooms are still closed. And as of mid-September, over 35% of the rooms closed are in the luxury and upper upscale segments, which begs the question as to how many of these luxury and upper upscale hotels will remain permanently closed. Next slide. We're also following hotel occupancy and average daily rate by chain scale or type of hotel. The graph on the left illustrates how the economy and mid-scale chains in pink have experienced the lowest decreases in occupancy, while the upper upscale and luxury chain scales, which are in green, have experienced the greatest drops in occupancy. As summer has turned into fall, we're also seeing a drop in occupancy in most chain scale categories. On the right-hand side, we're also tracking average daily rate by chain scale. As you can see, the biggest drops in ADR occurred in mid-April, and luxury hotels were impacted the most. Rates have been climbing since that time and are anywhere between 10 and 25% lower than same time last year, with mid-scale and economy and luxury hotels closing the gap the fastest. While most chain scales were achieving growth in ADR during the summer travel months, that has changed in the most recent data available, except for the mid-scale and economy hotels, which are continuing to trend up in terms of ADR. Next slide. This slide further demonstrates revenue per available room, or RevPAR performance by type of hotel or chain scale. As you can see on the left-hand side, RevPAR in the mid-scale economy hotel segment, which is the blue line, is the least impacted by decreases in RevPAR, while the luxury and upper upscale hotels, the dark green line, have been the most impacted. Again, as summer has transitioned into fall, we're seeing the week-over-week increases either slow in growth or drop altogether. On the right-hand side, you can see the performance metrics by occupancy, average rate, and RevPAR. Average rate has been least impacted, demonstrating that dropping rates really doesn't drive demand in a pandemic environment. Next slide. I think this is a really interesting slide. There's a much wider gap between weekday and weekend occupancy this year when compared to last year. Weekday travel is predominantly business travel and those traveling to attend conventions, whereas weekend travel is predominantly leisure oriented. With the lack of business travel and the cancellation of conventions this year due to COVID, the occupancy gap between weekday and weekend travel has widened significantly to 14%, where same time last year, the occupancy gap was less than 0.5%. Next slide. So our research group, which is based in Atlanta, has prepared baseline forecasts for the US and the 60 top MSAs in the country. These forecasts are prepared on a quarterly basis, and today I'm sharing the forecast prepared in August after the second quarter results were available. The baseline forecast for the US lodging market assumes a return to pre-COVID-19 RevPAR levels in 2024. This forecast further assumes that a vaccine is available and distributed by late 2021, and that there's some stabilization in the economy with continued fiscal and monetary stimulus, and the virus spread slows down nationwide. Next slide. So here you have our actual results for the US lodging market for 2018 and 2019. And then the current forecast, which was prepared in mid-August, which is shaded in gray, after the pandemic outbreak, which illustrates significant decreases in occupancy, average rate, and revenue per available room compared to 2019 performance. You can see in 2020, we're forecasting a negative 52.5% decrease in RevPAR for the US lodging market. CBRE Hotels Research is forecasting a 4-year recovery to pre-pandemic RevPAR levels for the US lodging industry, as you can see in 2024, highlighted in pink, of $89.27. So now I'm going to switch over to the San Francisco MSA market, if you want to advance the slide. Familiar site there. Next slide, please. So the San Francisco MSA includes the geographical boundaries from Marin County to the north, down to and including San Mateo County. There are just over 53,000 rooms, with the airport and San Mateo County regions representing just over 30% of the total MSA. The majority of the rooms, as you would expect, are represented by the city of San Francisco, with over 65% of the total rooms. Next slide. The composition and distribution of the rooms in the San Francisco MSA has an impact on the forecasted occupancy recovery. As you recall from the slides previously discussed, for the US, hotels in the upscale, upper upscale, and luxury chain scales fell the hardest and are recovering the slowest. And hotels located in urban and airport locations have been trending behind hotels located in suburban, interstate, and small metro towns. With the composition of the San Francisco MSA, whereby nearly 50% of the hotels in the MSA are considered upper priced, over 80% are located in the urban and airport markets, and 65% of the rooms in the MSA are located in the city of San Francisco. Those market attributes all play a role in forecasting the San Francisco MSA recovery. Next slide. Again, similar, this is our baseline scenario, and our research group has prepared this for the San Francisco MSA along with 60 other MSAs in the country and the US lodging forecast. Again, this was prepared, the second quarter results were available. And the baseline forecast for the San Francisco MSA assumes a return to pre-COVID-19 RevPAR levels in 2025. This forecast further assumes that a vaccine is available and distributed by late 21. There's some stabilization in the economy with continued fiscal and monetary stimulus, and the virus spread slows down nationwide. Next slide. Again, this is organized like previous forecasts you saw for the US lodging market. The actual results for 2018 and 2019 are presented in this slide, along with the current forecast, which was prepared in mid-August and shaded in gray, post-pandemic outbreak, and illustrates the significant decreases in occupancy, average rate, and RevPAR compared to 2019 performance. CBRE Hotels Research is forecasting a 4-year recovery to pre-pandemic occupancy levels in 2024, with recovery in ADR and RevPAR forecasted to return to 2019 levels in 2025. Next slide. This slide really just summarizes the differences between the market and the San Francisco MSA. As previously mentioned, there's a high incidence of upper price properties and hotels in the CBD and airport market, which has an impact on the forecasted market recovery. So based on the market's characteristics of the San Francisco MSA, this chart illustrates the difference of the forecasted RevPAR for 2020, which are circled in red, and recovery timeframe to 2019 levels for both market areas. The primary difference reflected in the timing of the return to 2019 RevPAR levels. So on that happy note, let's go to the next slide. So what on the overall profitability of your hotels? The Civic is already experienced through the first 8 months of 2020, with nearly a 57% drop in top line revenues. Gross operating profit fell 79% and EBITDA fell over 110%. Next slide. We further break down change in revenue per available room by property type. The biggest decrease in revenue is in the full service segment, while the extended stay segment represents the lowest decrease in revenue. The next slide, please. Similar to the change in revenue, the largest decreases in gross operating profit are in the full service segment at a 90% decrease. Extended stay, once again, decreased the least in GOP per available room at just over 57%. Next. Lastly, hotel EBITDA per available room decreased 107% for all hotels, with the full service properties EBITDA per available room down 129%. In other words, for the US industry as a whole, for the first 8 months of this year, US hotels were losing money at the EBITDA line. Next slide. This slide gives some context as to EBITDA margins by property type year-to-date August this year in the dark green versus the same time period last year in the light green. For all US hotels in year-to-date August 2019, EBITDA represented 23.1% of total operating revenues. This year, that same indice was negative 5.6%. Full service hotels had the lowest EBITDA margin year-to-date August 19 at 18.1% and represented the largest decrease year-to-date August 20 at negative 19%. Limited service and extended stay hotels had the highest EBITDA margins in the year-to-date 2019 time period, between 32 and 38%, with the extended stay category decreasing the least year-to-date August this year to nearly 21% of operating revenue. One more slide here. Next slide. So we further highlight EBITDA as a percent of total operating revenue this year through August versus last year through August. And this is by chain scale. While all hotels in the US sample achieved just over a 23% EBITDA in the first 8 months of 2019, the same time period this year, there was a loss of 5.6%. Luxury and upper upscale hotels experienced the greatest losses, while upscale hotels were the most profitable and decreased the least. With the losses in profitability, there's been a direct impact on hotel values. What we're seeing in the work that we're doing on our valuation side is we're seeing value impairment anywhere between 20 and 35%, depending on the type of hotel we're valuing. And I think the next slide, this might be it. Yes, that's it. I think, John, I don't know if you are waiting to the end for questions, but I'll be available for questions whenever you start taking them.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. And we fully recognize it is not the messenger. The
Thank
data
you.
was very sobering. We've had a number of questions come in the chat a few hands raised. I would ask that you submit your questions through the chat, please, so we have one conduit. And Julie, please don't go away. We are going to pivot to our next panelist, and I'm sure there'll be a number of questions coming specifically for you in a couple of minutes. Thank you so much. SFO is the centerpiece of our Bay Area tourism sector, and I'd like to give a shout out to John Ballesteros, SFO's Chief External Affairs Officer, who serves as a very engaged and most thoughtful board member on our Bureau's board. Representing SFO today at this forum is Doug Yakel, Public Information Officer at San Francisco International Airport. In his position, he serves as SFO's primary spokesperson for internal and external communications, represents the airport at various community outreach forums, and develops content and program for the airport's social media outlets. Doug also created a YouTube video series titled Inside SFO, which takes viewers behind the scenes to profile the people and events happening at San Francisco International Airport. Doug, please let us know when you are ready to advance your slides. And now I'll let you take it away. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
John, thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We'll go to my next slide. And I want to talk a little bit about air travel and a potential path to recovery, because we realize that air transportation touches so many different industries, and it's such an enabler of Bay Area economies that it's really not just the health of airports and airlines that's at stake here. It's the health of so many businesses that rely on air transportation to do what they do and to get back to the levels that we all look forward to and those that we remember pre-pandemic. I do want to preface this by saying that I know that the theme of today's meeting is really looking several years into the future. And I also share Julie's assessment that it'll probably take us 3 to 4 years to really get back to where we were pre-pandemic. But our industry finds itself in a place where it's almost difficult to predict the next month as opposed to the next several years. And I know that as we have conversations with airlines about the level of activity that they're going to operate, usually right now we'd be talking about what airlines would be doing next summer or next winter. Right now we're talking to them about what they're doing in November. So that goes to show the level of uncertainty that still exists in our industry. But the good news is a potential way out is starting to emerge. It's starting to come into focus, and I'll get to that in my presentation. But let's talk about kind of where we've come from a little bit. And let's go to the next slide. This is a look at SFO's passenger activity this year, and you can really see that the low point for us was in April. This is a measurement of the average number of passengers that went through our security checkpoints every day. In January, we were operating pre-pandemic, fairly typical, about 60,000 a day. In April, we had many days where that number was less than 2,000, so really almost drilled down to a trickle. The good news is that our passenger activity has been recovering since then, but the recovery has been a little slower than we'd like. You can see this dotted line is really where we hope to end up by the end of this year. And initially back in March, our hope was that by the end of this year, we would recover about 50% of our pre-pandemic passenger activity. And you can see that we're trending slightly below that. And we're still well below, if we go to the next slide, we're still trending well below our 2019 levels, our pre-pandemic levels. And there are several reasons for this. We'll go to the next slide. You know, Julie touched on some of this, and it resonates for our air travel industry as well. There's several barriers. There are several really good reasons why people are not yet taking to the skies at the level they did before the pandemic. And the first one is really restrictions by country. There are still restrictions that would prevent foreign nationals from entering the United States, restrictions that would prevent US citizens from visiting other countries. And if we go to the next slide, there's further restrictions even within the United States. There are health orders, there are quarantine requirements. Hawaii is a great example. Tourism is right now essentially still closed because non-residents are expected to quarantine for 14 days, although that's going to change in about a week or so, and I'll touch on that. If we go to the next slide, there are also what I would call this reopening, reclosing pendulum, and we see this have its effect on the way that people are booking travel or canceling travel plans. You know, as we see areas reopening, as we see businesses reopening, that develops confidence and people start wanting to resume the normal things that they do, including air travel. But then when we see that scaled back, when we see regions spiking, that has a negative impact on people's desire to travel. On the next slide, another consideration, as Julie mentioned, is financial, both from a business standpoint and from a personal disposable income perspective. There are people whose jobs and livelihoods are being affected, and their willingness to spend money on air travel is obviously impacted by that as well. On the next slide, another consideration is really the lack of coordination on a federal level. I compare this event a lot to 9/11. And in the wake of 9/11, the federal government really articulated what the new standards would be that all US airports would have to follow. And obviously different circumstances, there was a national security consideration there. But what's missing in this right now is a lack of federal guidance, and what that creates is inconsistent experiences across US airports. And I think really what we need is for the federal government to help articulate what that new normal is going to look like so people can expect the same thing at every airport that they go to. But ultimately, on the last slide, the end result is uncertainty. There's uncertainty for air travelers in terms of what to expect. The fact that they're getting onto airplanes and not knowing the status of the people around them, that creates uncertainty. And all of these things are really barriers to air travel. Let's go to the next slide. So here's what we've done so far at SFO. We were the first airport in the US to require facial coverings, and we've got a great process in place to not only hand them out for free in every terminal, but we've got a roving team of individuals that ensure mask compliance in all of our facilities. We've also really reconfigured the airport to allow for physical distancing, and you can see on the screen those physical distancing dots. We've installed about 15,000 of those throughout the airport. We've also installed hundreds of hand sanitizers around the airport, hundreds of clear plastic barriers, and we've also got enhanced cleaning measures underway. And none of this is unique to SFO, by the way. Every airport is chasing this, every airline is chasing this, but clearly these steps on their own are not enough to recover air travel. It's going to take more than that. So let's go to the next slide. So what's next? I would say that making the airport and air travel experience more touchless is a high priority. We recently announced that we added our Customs and Border Protection simplified arrivals process, which uses biometrics to allow travelers to experience a more touch-free arrival process. And I think you're going to see more and more use of technology to reduce touch points throughout the air travel experience. Cleaning and disinfection, I think also we'll see a lot of new technologies being used there. We're actually pilot testing a UV disinfection system on the handrails of moving walkways. So you're going to see more and more of that. The next thing you can expect to see is what we call air bridges or corridors. These are essentially bilateral agreements between two destinations that would allow air travel to start to recover. And this would involve an agreement on health measures and acceptable protocols. And this is one of the things that we think will really help unlock air travel. But probably the most exciting thing that we have underway is on the next slide, and that is some type of health registration or evaluation process. This is really emerging as the thing that'll help air travel recover. And if we go to the next slide, you know, back in August, SFO became the first US airport to launch an on-site rapid COVID testing capability. And when we launched it, initially it was launched with airport employees as the intended audience, but we always had our eye on the potential to expand this to passengers as well. And United Airlines recently announced plans to use our on-site testing facility for their Hawaii-bound passengers. And this really supports the state of Hawaii's goal by October 15th to open up tourism. And since that time, we've just seen a proliferation of airlines and airports launching their own on-site testing capabilities. And there's a lot of excitement around this. I would say that in the US, the Hawaii market is the market that's leading this because of the state's willingness to open it up to tourism for travelers that have a negative test result. But we're seeing this concept play out elsewhere. We're seeing places like London Heathrow explore this concept for travel to New York. We're seeing them test out a health certification app where people could register that they've either tested negative in the last 72 hours or received a negative test result on site. So we think that this is really the thing that's got some legs. And if we go to the next slide, you know, the media is really driving this awareness too, which is good for us because this is really the big question is this the type of thing that can help facilitate a recovery for air travel? If we go to the next slide. So in conclusion, air travel is recovering. We have reached the bottom and we're starting to climb out of it. We're climbing out of it slower than we would have preferred to, but we are recovering nonetheless. On the next slide, that new normal is coming into focus. In our next bullet, it's really the need for a consistent federal policy, because what you have right now is individual airports and airlines testing the waters, exploring this wilderness, if you will, trying to search for what that new normal is. But we really need some cohesive guidance from the federal government in addition to financial aid. I would say that I have never seen a level of commitment like this from the industry. I think that there is a sense that travelers want to travel and airlines want to get travelers on board their aircraft, but we need to reduce the barriers between these two parties. When I look at things like change fees being eliminated forever by certain airlines, that in my mind is a true indicator of how badly this industry wants to get people flying again. So I think that's a good thing. And ultimately, I think that air travel is going to be a better experience in the end result of this. So I'm very positive about what the future will hold. And lastly, we've got a great page. Travel Well is our program that kind of talks about all of the health measures that we have in place if you'd like to explore that. And with that, I thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you so much, Doug. And, you know, it's interesting living in the Bay Area. We have a number of iconic bridges. Obviously, Golden Gate is the most prominently known. And today I learned a new word, the air bridge. So we'll talk more about that when we come back for our Q&A. Thank you so much. Well, prior to COVID, CVBs didn't interact a whole lot with the corporate travel segment. We let the hotels run with that ball. And it was a wonderful base of business for the entire travel community to have that corporate base. As the market went into free fall, we were fortunate to connect with our next speaker. She's an expert in her field, has become a good friend, and both of us have previously been hotel general managers, so we've had that bonding moment. I'd like to now introduce Tara Stangel, who is head of lodging and car partnerships at TripActions, fast becoming the default for corporate travel and expenses. TripActions is the leading cloud-based T&E platform that combines industry-leading technology with best-in-class travel agency service. TripActions is trusted by 4,000 plus companies globally to protect traveling employees while controlling costs and saving money to drive business continuity. Tara, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours, and just let us know when you're ready to advance the slide.
Perfect. Thank you, John. And always a pleasure to be here. I saw some old friends on the chat box. I just got to give a shout out to my ex-GM friends in Kimpton. Love seeing you all here. And then like many of you, I've been, and I wouldn't say we've been through this, but I was a GM in San Francisco after 2001. And then obviously spent some time with Expedia through the rest of the other craziness that was going on. And now I'm at TripActions, which is a corporate travel company based here in the Bay Area with offices in Palo Alto and San Francisco. We've got a little over 4,000 clients. We've actually added about 400 in the past couple of months. So we've had clients that came over to us because of the technology and the tools that we have, specifically around duty of care, even more so with the expense platform that we released and launched yesterday. So we can go to the next slide, please. I saw this and I just had to laugh because one, remember when we all hated this? At the same time, I think some of us would like to see that again. One, stand in line being a business or whether it's a leisure travel, or just being close to people and not being afraid of what's happening. So I thought I'd share that and just say, remember when we thought this was a pain, but it really wasn't. If we go to the next slide, what I want to share with you today is really what some of our clients are telling us, what they're seeing out there. What are they thinking? What do they want to know about what's happening? When do they think they're going to start traveling again? And it really comes down to, many of them are hopefully optimistic, but like all of us, they're very realistic, and it's about confidence. They want to know, what are the virus levels at the destination? What are the hotels and airlines, restaurants doing? How can we display that information to them? And how can we tell their travelers what's happening in those areas? They also want to know where their employees are, just in case they need to get them back quickly. Many of the clients felt short at the beginning of this year when they did not know where their travelers' employees were, because they were booking off platform and they didn't have those tools available. So they want to make sure they're protected should they be able to get their employees back quickly. Even more importantly, they're just wondering, what are the change fees? I mean, it was huge when we saw the airlines reduce or remove their change fees. We started seeing some flight bookings immediately, because people felt confident that if they had to change their plans based on different government restrictions being pulled back or being applied again, they want to be able to change without any kind of fees and a little bit more hassle-free. Interesting, I was watching our Traverse event yesterday, and one of the speakers started talking about approvals, right? You know, what do you need in order to start traveling? Well, right now, I simply have like 3, and then John and Doug reminded me of a 4th. So I'll start with the first 3. One was government, right? The government's got to tell you whether or not it's okay to travel, if it's okay for you to travel from California into New York, or will you be quarantined? And then you have to also get your company to say it's okay to travel. And then, of course, you got to make sure that you yourself are willing to travel. But John and Doug pointed out when I talked to them earlier, it really starts with the spouse approval first, because whether or not you're able to leave the house with the 3 kids at home probably is the deciding factor, even though we'll probably use government as the reason why you can't. When it comes to clients thinking about when they're going to resume, the key is positive feedback from their travelers and their employees that are starting to venture out. So what was the hygiene like? What was the safety like? Was it easy to travel? So the more that we can share positive feedback, especially when people are flying on planes, when they're checking into hotels, all of that will then allow people to be more confident as they continue to start traveling. If we go to the next slide, I had some bullet points about what clients and their chatter that we're starting to see here out there as they're starting to talk with us about what they're booking. There is going to be more attention on the cost and the return of the trip. They are going to be, I was listening again yesterday about more clients that are wondering, you know, we'll start to have our employees travel if they sign a deal. And how can they tie that into maybe their Salesforce information? While budgets were recaptured and there's many unused tickets, prepaid meetings and airline, they're going to probably throttle that prepaid spend to create the most value. So there is quite a bit of money out there that's being held up and that they will want to start spending again. All clients want to respect the personal risk tolerance. So all clients are letting it up to be the personal, to the person to see whether or not they want to travel and respecting that. And again, many are very anxious and ready to be on the road. They do predict that groups will be small. The large conferences will be toward the end of 2021. Again, that has to do with, you know, the approval process. As the cities move through tiers, the travel will be more likely. So as we start to open up here, and that is being public out there, more people will start to come visit us. Many of the clients predict that their hotel spend will be 40 to 60% of 2019, and unfortunately, air will probably be less than 40%. Sorry about that, Doug. Hiring continues, so eventually training will follow. So many of the clients are continuing to hire, and eventually they predict that they will need to have training happening. There is a much shorter booking window. So when we're looking at the business that we see, because we pull in inventory from the OTA sites, we see that many of the rates that are offered through the OTA sites, because it's such a shorter booking window, tend to be a little bit lower. And many clients are wanting to talk to the hotels about, let's get creative on how we can win back that business. Maybe it's day use rooms, maybe it's maybe it's like just to have the families go stay a night at a hotel, and the companies are willing to give expenses for that. So it's not necessarily for business, but just more for employee emotional well-being. And then really the clients, as much as they really want to talk directly, they want to hear from the hotels. That helps them reduce the anxieties. And then lastly, if we go to the next slide, it's just some of the recent booking trends we've seen at TripActions. Again, as I said, we've been able to gain a few hundred clients in the past couple of months, which is great. Rental cars, as much as we all love Uber and Lyft, rental cars are the fastest growth. We've actually started to see a little bit of close to year-on-year growth from rental cars. Many of our clients in the past were predominantly Uber and Lyft passengers, but now they started to rent cars. It's easier for them to reduce the risk. They're opting to drive versus fly between here and LA or between Dallas and Houston or one of those markets. Hotels are being booked in the non-urban locations, and they're definitely in the economy and the mid-scale brands. We're seeing quite a bit of business in Indiana, Texas, kind of in the central area, and then flights are much shorter and they're slowest to return. Again, super sorry, Doug. Shorter booking windows, lower ADRs, and heavily skewed to brands. Holiday Inns, Wyndhams, some of the extended stay type properties, and more of the properties that have kitchens, whether it's Residence Inn, those type of properties tend to be booked a little bit more. And again, as I said, cities reopen as travel reopens. New York, when they removed the California restricted, as I said before, we did see immediate bookings into New York. Almost all clients that we've talked to, I know this is a question that might come up, are on a pause with limited travel that is deemed essential. Many companies are predicting early in 2021, with a few suggesting even into mid-2021. I talked to a company yesterday that's based in San Francisco. They asked me not to share their name, but pretty large company. And they said that they have a pause until July of 2021. Now, like all of us, they don't know. Every single client just does not know when, and they hate to say with certainty when in 2021 they'll return. It might be sooner. They're hoping it's sooner, but they also want to be realistic, and it depends on when their offices reopen. Again, where we see most flexibility in travel are from fast food restaurants that are in growth mode with building new places, some government contractors, some certification companies out there auditing hygiene protocols, and of course we have a couple of healthcare companies that continue to grow. We are getting a few clients who are moving locations and need to travel to new office locations. So what we're starting to see in that area. But while we're at TripActions, if you have any questions about some of the clients that we have, we're more than happy to answer those questions. I know I have Travis Becker on the phone. You can always find us through LinkedIn, or you can just shoot me an email at tstangel@TripActions. I'm more than happy to help answer your questions, and then also help you with some of the RFPs if you're doing any RFPs next year. A few clients are asking us to do that for next year, but most of them are holding off until January. And I'll pass it back over to you, John.
Well, thank you so much, Tara. Very insightful. And we do have these fun moments in rehearsal, coining new phrases and have some memorable discussion, hence the spouse approval that you referred to. So with that, if we could bring up the camera on all three of our panelists, and we'll dig into some Q&A. And the first question, I think it speaks to the meaning of the word. And Julie, you used the term permanently closed hotels. Doug, you used the word forever on change fees. Tara, you had a similar adjective. And for instance, in hotels, is it really a long short pause or a longer pause? Or Julie, are you speaking of those buildings physically being repurposed at some point in the future?
Yeah, I think, am I off mute?
You are.
Okay, great. I think, first and foremost, hotels were deemed to be closed in certain municipalities with different opening dates by city. For instance, the city of San Francisco, unless you were accommodating essential travelers or essential guests, you weren't allowed to reopen until I think it was mid to late September. Now those hotels are allowed to open. Some owners are choosing not to open, just given the dynamics in downtown San Francisco with a lack of conventions and a lack of business travel, which we've talked about on this seminar. It doesn't seem to make sense for some ownership groups to reopen. What we have seen around the country is some adaptive reuse of hotels to different uses, which could be on a more permanent basis, whether it's student housing for universities, whether it's multifamily, residential, and in some cases we're seeing a conversion to office. We're seeing some more of that repurposing happening on the East Coast, namely in New York City.
Wow, and that's an interesting concept. If you were to go back 110 years at the St. Francis in downtown San Francisco, a property that I had the privilege of managing at one point, in the historic building, there were residences. Affluent families actually lived in a hotel. So it's interesting that we might be coming back on that. Doug and Tara, for change fees, forever is a long time. Is that really forever?
Well, I think that, you know, some airlines are taking a more progressive approach to winning customers back. And, you know, these are the airlines that continue to block middle seats, even though it affects their bottom line. I think that, you know, the airlines that have already announced they're getting rid of them forever, they know that even 10 years from now, if they reinstate them, they will hear about it. But I think right now it's just an indication of how desperate airlines are to get folks back in the air.
I would agree with that. I think if, you know, 5 years from now, if they change it, it'll be a different fee, but they are definitely desperate to try to get people confidence back in traveling. If they didn't do it, there'd be less bookings. At least people are booking and saying, okay, I can change. And that's what companies have to do now is just open the door a little bit so people have a chance. And be less restrictive.
Yeah. And interesting because that's always been this cloud when you booked, unless you booked at that super premium level to have that flexibility. So very, very encouraging news there. We'll go back to Julie with the next question. There was you gave a statistic of the devaluation of an asset, and just to make sure I got it correctly, because my senior moment of hearing, it seemed like a pretty big number. And then there was a question in the chat correlating that to the recovery time in this cycle compared to 9/11, and this question specifically was going way back to the Great Depression. But maybe you can opine on those two things, please.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, I can't provide much historical perspective on the Great Depression, although sometimes I do feel that old. But in terms of the value impairment statement I made, part of the Hotels Advisory Group, we have a valuation component on our team, which means we do a lot of appraisal work for hotels. And many of the assignments we're doing now is comparing what the value of these assets were pre-COVID and then post-COVID, and seeing what kind of value impairment we're coming up with. And so of the 200 or so hotel appraisals that we've done around the country since the outbreak of COVID, we're seeing anywhere, you know, I think the average value impairment is around 20%, meaning the value on average is down 20% of where the value was of the asset pre-COVID. And that fluctuates. So if you are, you know, a big group incentive house in the luxury category, your value impairment's probably greater than that. Again, it's asset by asset. It's very specific to each hotel, but on average, we're seeing about a 20% value impairment.
Wow, that is a significant number, to say the least. And as you, the next question for the team, is there a segment, a bandwidth of recovery that may come back first? In industry, I don't think we can get to a specific company, but do you see someone carrying that relay torch into the Coliseum ahead of the rest of the pack?
I'll jump in for air travel. I think that, you know, we've been seeing, and this kind of mirrors some of the data that Julie and Tara presented, that it is really leisure travel that's leading the recovery, not business travel. And so when I think about the scenario that's starting to play out with Hawaii, I think this is a blueprint for how recovery will happen for air travel. And that is, the demand is for leisure travel, and enablers like negative test result certifications will enable a heavily traveled tourism market like Hawaii to reopen. The economic potential that that creates will become an incentive for other sites, Florida, pick other, Las Vegas, etc., other leisure dominated sites to follow suit. They're going to want to get in on that same economic potential, and they'll similarly look to create a set of circumstances that satisfies those local health authorities, that allows for air travel to resume and to allow that leisure travel to flow the way that it's demanded.
Yeah, and I think I'll add on to that, to Doug's comments, which were really related to the air travel. What we saw during the summer months were the hotels that were in drive-to locations, where people felt comfortable getting in their car and driving anywhere from 20 to 150, 200 miles to get out of the house and have a mini staycation, if you will. Those hotels performed the best over the summer months. So if you were a hotel located on the coast, or if you were a hotel located with access and great proximity to the outdoors, those hotels seem to perform much better during the summer months. What we're waiting to see is if that trend continues through the fall, given that people are, summer's over, although our seasons seem to be blending this year. It's hard to believe that we're in October, but we expect the weekend business still to be very strong in those drive-to locations for the remainder of the year. It's just the weekdays. We're kind of waiting to see how the trends play out.
And for us, from a client view, entertainment companies will probably be the first to get out there because they need to produce new content. And that is their moneymaker as much as it is. So you'll see companies that, whether it's Disney production, Netflix, Amazon, whatever it might be, they're going to need to get out there and start traveling. And then therefore that will lead that stage. I saw a chat on the side about homeless in San Francisco, and more clients are asking us about the public relations view of San Francisco and whether or not there is quite a few homeless. And of course, because we're here, it's easier for us to say, no, it's not what it seems, but that is becoming a more of a concern for clients about what does downtown San Francisco look like. So I just want to respond to that chat that it is being asked.
And I'll just touch on that a little bit. The counties collectively, in partnership with the state of California, had a project called Project Room Key, which was taking hotel room product for short-term lease to accommodate the underprivileged who needed to be separated, quarantined, get through the crisis. That has morphed to a tool called Project Home Key, where the state has made some money available for the purchase of hotel properties. And I know there are discussions underway in San Mateo County regarding an asset selection. There was an announcement a week or two ago in Santa Clara County. So the hotel products are actually a possible solution, not for 100% of the problem, but in cooperation with various agencies to find a solution to that problem. And as we continue down this recovery path, it will take longer, just as for someone who was in this game as a younger manager in the 87 crash, 01, SARS, the Great Recession. I remember from the Great Recession, by mid-2010, the hotel I was managing, we were starting to get a groove going and things were starting to get some traction. So this certainly is bigger than anything we've experienced before, certainly in our lifetime. And I think collectively we have forged wonderful friendships and relationships, evidenced on today's call with our panelists, and in general, all the exchange. If you're ever asked to contribute or help someone in the travel industry, we really come together in a show of force and support, which has really been wonderful. And with that, we are approaching the top of the hour. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. We could chat and geek out on figures and numbers and statistics, at least I could, with the three of you all afternoon. But we thank you so much for being here. And to our viewers, we will publish the link, the presentation, and if there are some follow-up questions, we will certainly do our best to get that information to you quickly. So to Julie, Doug, and Tara, thank you so much. We wish you much health and safety and happiness. And we will see which spouse allows us to travel. That'll be our little internal competition. Notes before we sign off. We have some interesting programs coming up in the near future. An Instagram Live with Aquarium by the Bay. Aquarium by the Bay located at Pier 39, and they will be doing an IG Live on Monday, the 12th of October. And after that walk around, we're all going to be hungry for a Sibby's cupcake. They're going to show us what they are up to, and jack-o'-lantern themed, and a safe way to participate in Halloween this year. And then we're very, very excited with the last item here, as fresh as it gets, our 2020 virtual award ceremony, really saluting the growers, farmers, fishermen on the coast who bring us this fresh product, and our restaurateurs and managers who bring it to the table for us, along with all of the farmers markets here on the peninsula. So that will be on the November 18th. And I made light, in all seriousness, this is our first pandemic, but the San Mateo County Historical Association is so interested in recording our emotions, our actions, what we went through, to provide a glimpse of what daily life was like during this pandemic. We hope it's not needed for anyone in the future, but they do want to capture that information, and we encourage you to visit their site and share your experiences. So with that, I will say thank you for joining us. We will have the link out and the notes and follow-up questions by tomorrow afternoon. We thank you for being here, and we wish you and yours all of the best, and we hope to see you soon here in San Mateo County, Silicon Valley, very, very soon. Thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon.